Do you ever feel like the communication is off between you and your spouse? Or do you feel like sometimes you could be talking to your spouse and they're not understanding what you're trying to say to them? So that's what I wanted to talk to you today about. The communication in relationships. The communication in relationships. Now, we already know that most men, they don't like to talk. We say what we got to say, and we say it straightforward. We don't use too many words, and we keep it moving. On the other hand, you got women that love to talk, and they love to express their feelings. And there's nothing wrong with either one. But when we come together in a relationship, we have to work on that so that we can communicate better with each other. So I came up with 7 keys that I feel will help both of us, men and women, on how to communicate better. So here's the first one. The first key is to listen to understand, not to respond. Listen to understand, not to respond. Now, when you're doing this, I need you to make sure that you keep your spouse a priority within the conversation. So, the way of doing that is you will listen to everything they have to say so that you can understand what they're trying to say to you. And I know in a lot of conversations, we are so quick to respond to what they're saying because you don't know how I feel and you don't know this. Let's slow it down and pump the brakes, okay? Let's just focus on what they're trying to say so we can get a clear understanding of what they're trying to say to us. I don't care how many questions you have to ask to get an understanding. Do that. It is very important that you understand what your spouse is trying to say to you. So please ask, do not assume. Because you know what assuming does. It will make something out of you. You already know. So please ask as many questions as you need to ask so that you can get a clear understanding of what they're trying to say to you. And the other thing that I do want to bring up is do not, I repeat, do not make the conversation all about you. We want to focus on our spouse. And hopefully in return, they will do the same. So if you focus on your spouse and your spouse focuses on what you're trying to say to them, everybody gets a clear understanding and we know how to move forward. So the second key I want to bring up is it is okay to disagree, but it is not okay to dismiss. So it is okay to disagree with your spouse on certain topics and situations, but it is not okay to just dismiss it and act like it didn't happen. It's so many problems that can arise when you do not talk about certain things that may come up in your relationship. And that is one of the biggest issues that I feel relationships have, because when you're having a debate or argument, whatever you want to call it, with your spouse, and it gets heated, we tend to just dismiss it like it didn't happen, and we never get it resolved. So it causes an even bigger issue in the long run, because when that issue arises again, in most cases, it will. So when it arises again, you don't know how to react. You don't know what to do, because the last time you talked about it, we got in a big old argument and nobody wants to bring it up or nobody wants to discuss it in full detail. And we can't do that. We cannot do that within a relationship with our spouse. We got to resolve it. So we got to have those hard conversations and come to some conclusion on how to move forward within our relationship. So we got to talk about it, and we cannot dismiss it at all. So if you have a conversation with your spouse and it's getting heated, it's okay to take a break, but it is not okay to just dismiss it. So this brings me to my third key, which is to be honest with one another in love. Be honest with one another in love. We have to be honest with our spouses. I don't care how serious the matter is or how much you think this is going to hurt your spouse. You need to tell the truth. Okay? The ugly truth is better than a pretty lie. So we always got to tell the truth regardless. And you do not want to start your relationship or anywhere in your relationship really with a lie, because your spouse will never forget that. So you need to always tell the truth within your relationship. And like I said, it may hurt your spouse, but the most important thing is whenever you talk to your spouse, you need to talk to them in love. And you always need to be honest in love. So you need to watch how you say it, and you need to watch the way you deliver it to your spouse. And you need to be mindful of how your spouse may feel. So as long as you express yourself in a loving way, whatever you have to say to them, like I said, it may hurt, but they will be more receptive of it if you express it in love. So always remember to, number one, be honest, and number two, always do it in love. So the fourth key is you got to be willing to compromise. You got to be willing to compromise. This is not a one-man band. When you are in a marriage, you got to compromise. And that is something that you have to learn over time. I can tell you so many stories about how I just did things my way and did not think about my spouse at all, especially at the beginning, man, because you've been single all this time and then you get married and you got to learn how to think about another person. Like it takes time, man. It takes time. But you have to be willing to compromise. So if you're hearing your spouse, you're listening to your spouse, and they're telling you what they need help with, your job is to compromise and understand what your spouse needs and fill in the gap as much as possible. So, for example, if my wife says she needs help with the kids because she's feeling overwhelmed at her job and XYZ, and she just needs help with cooking or cleaning up the house or anything like that, my job is to stand up and see where you can fill in the gap. So if you need help with the kids, okay, I'll pick up the kids on these days during the week, and I'll cook on these days during the week. That way you can take care of what you need to take care of on your end. And that's what you need to do within your relationship. You got to give a little to get a little. Or you got to give a lot to get a lot. However much you want to give. But you need to give as much as you can to your spouse, and hopefully they do the same thing in return so that you guys become one strong unit within your family and within your household. So it is very important to compromise with your spouse. Very important. So the fifth key is to pay close attention to their body language. You want to pay close attention to your spouse's body language, because body language will never lie. It never lies. You can talk to your spouse and ask them how they're feeling. How are you doing? Are you okay? Is something wrong? And they'll say, I'm fine. I'm fine. You ain't fine. You ain't fine. You know why I know you ain't fine? Because you're rolling your eyes. You got your arms folded. You ain't moving like this. Like, there's so many things that's going on right now that's telling me you're not fine. But in those situations, you just want to go, okay, I know you're not fine, but if you ever want to talk about it, just let me know. I'm here for you. And just leave it like that. Don't nag them about it. Don't keep asking them. Just let them know that you're there and keep it moving. And hopefully they will come back and express themselves to you later on. So, like I said, just handle it like that and keep it moving, but always pay attention to their body language because their body language never lies. So the sixth key that I want to bring up is to take a loving and positive approach. Take a loving and positive approach when you're talking to your spouse. And what I mean by that is before you even talk to your spouse, make sure that you talk to them in a loving way and approach them in a loving manner. And just make sure that you have a positive outlook on the conversation and approach them with a positive mindset. Because if you talk to them in a negative way, or you already have a conclusion before the conversation even starts, they're going to pick up on that energy and they're going to give it right back to you. And you don't want that. You don't want that. So you want to have a positive mindset when you have the conversation with your spouse, and you want to approach them in a loving way. Now, before I give you the last key, you know I got to drop some scripture on you. And there is one scripture that I already used in my previous video, but it makes so much sense to use it in this one. And that is 1 Peter chapter 4, verse 8. And it says, "Above all, love each other deeply, because love covers over a multitude of sins." Above all, love each other deeply. So we need to do our best to operate in love at all times, or at least try our best to do so. Because it is hard, but we got to try. We got to try to operate in love at all times. So my seventh key is to be proactive instead of reactive. Be proactive instead of reactive. The best way I can show you this is just last night of me recording this video, me and my wife got into a heated situation. And I'm going to pause right here because I just said that, right? And I know my wife is watching this and she like, what are you talking about? Oh, man. But yeah, we had a heated situation and it happened real quick. And I had to figure out how I was going to get out of this or how I was going to move forward. And the situation was my wife decided to wash all the bed linens in the house. So our bed, my son's bed, and all that, right? So she washed all the linens, and then she didn't have time to put all the linens back on the beds because she was going out with my mom. They was going out to eat that night. So she washed everything, but then she left everything on the bed, on our bed. And she told my oldest son to fix his bed. And he said, okay. He's 10 years old, by the way. Got to put that out. But she told him to make the bed. He said, okay. She leaves, goes out to eat. So I'm there with both kids, my 10-year-old as well as my 1-year-old. So my 1-year-old, he needs a lot of attention, right? So I'm with him majority of the night. My son comes in. He's making his bed. I walked in his room. I said, what are you doing? He said, I'm making my bed. I said, okay. Do you need any help? He said, no, Dad. I got it. Cool. I left him, right? I tend to the 1-year-old. Washing him up, giving him a bath, feeding him, and all that good stuff, right? So it's time for everybody to go to bed. Everybody goes to bed. Wife comes home. She just got through the door right when my oldest son went to bed. So he's still up. So she goes around and she's like, oh, I need to make the beds. She makes our bed, or tries to make our bed, and then comes in and says, where is the sheet at? And I'm like, what sheet are you talking about? I'm like, the sheet that goes on the mattress. And I'm like, it should be on the bed. And she's like, it's not. So then she goes in my son's room, my oldest son's room, and he has it on his bed. And then the bed is looking, kind of weird. The sheet's not on there all the way like it's supposed to be. And she comes out of his room and looks at me and says, do you not know how to make a bed? TF. So I had two responses after that. The first response was my fleshly response, and that was very rude and could be very nasty because that is what she gave me. I was hot. Just in that moment, I was like, how you going to tell a 42-year-old man, do you know how to make a bed? And she said it in a very nasty tone. And like I said, my first response was a very fleshly response, and it was going to be real nasty. But I went with my second response, and I just said, what are you talking about? I've been over here with the baby, getting him together, and he said that he didn't need any help with the bed. And I just left it like that. And then she walks off and goes, well, I should have just made the bed myself before I left. And I didn't say anything because, number one, if I would have said something, it would have took it to a whole nother level because you just gave me a second chance to take off on you. And number two, I was like, the first thing that we need to do is alleviate the heat in this conversation because it can go real left real quick. And that's what I decided to do, was alleviate the heat in that situation. She walked away, made the beds, and we just went on and kept on moving. Now, with me saying that, she probably forgot all about this conversation. And in my mind, I was already thinking that because this is not that serious. It's not that deep. And I know in a lot of marriages, when you first start out, within those first few years, you're going to have a lot of arguments. A lot. And it's going to feel like the end of the world. But when you get older and you start getting them years in that marriage, you're going to have a lot of arguments and they ain't going to mean a dime. It's not going to mean a hill of beans, man, because you're going to have so many situations that you guys gonna argue about and disagree about, and you just got to move through it. You got to work through those things. Like, your first job in a heated conversation is to alleviate the heat, number one, and then number two, have a healthy conversation about it if you need to. In that situation, I was like, whatever, just make the bed. Do what you need to do, make the bed, and let's move on. I don't even care right now. So if it's a situation that I do care about, trust me, I would have that conversation. We're going to have that conversation. But in that case, it's not that big of a deal. But you have to be mindful of the conversation that you have with your spouse at all times. Some situations that arise, you will have to have those conversations. You will have to pretty much have a debate about, and you got to talk through it. But like I said, you got to think that stuff through, and you got to operate in love. And one huge and great example is Jesus Christ. When you look back on everything he did to save humanity, that was his only goal, was to save humanity. He went through a lot of stuff to save us. But he had his goal. He focused on his goal all the way to the end, all the way up to the point of him dying on the cross. Everybody wanted him to, save himself and telling him, you could call angels to help you and save you. Why you won't do it? And he knew what he had to stand on. God called him to this earth to do a certain thing and finish a task, and he saw it all the way through. regardless of what happens. And in our case, in our marriage, our goal is to have a healthy, loving marriage. Point blank, period. So whatever we got to go through and do, that's what we got to do. So don't think that you're not going to argue with your spouse. It's going to happen. You're going to have arguments. I don't know where we get this from that we're supposed to be loving all the time, because it's not going to work. It's not going to work out like that. You are dealing with another human, and we are all human. So we all have certain things that we go through as individuals as well as with each other. So you have to remember that. You are in a covenant with another human. And you will have to love that human regardless and through different situations. So please remember that. If you don't remember nothing else. So when we have these heated arguments and debates, or whatever you want to call them, we have to remember that we're going to have arguments, but the key is how we're going to have those arguments, how we're going to handle different situations. And we need to handle it in love. Okay? We got to handle it in love. So I hope this video helps you in your communication with your spouse, and we can continue to have this conversation. You can let me know in the comments what stuck out to you or what you want to talk about, and I may make another video on it. But just let me know what you're thinking, man. And I will see you guys on the next video. Peace.